What if the person who smiles at you, who seems ordinary, even fragile, carries within them a darkness capable of destroying entire lives? Think about that before you sleep tonight, because the face of evil is rarely what we expect. A woman alone in a concrete cell. The silence broken only by the metallic clang of heavy doors. She doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She just waits. And waiting is torture. The years pass slowly, dragged out as if time refused to end. But what brought Michelle Michaud here is something that defies all human logic. The viewer first feels the weight, the psychological abyss, the emptiness of a life marked by violence. Only later do they understand the cause. This woman, awaiting execution in California, is not here by chance. You are here because you crossed the line where desire meets cruelty, where intimacy mingles with horror. Now close your eyes for a moment. Imagine someone being torn from their normal routine. An ordinary morning. An ordinary street. A day that seemed like any other. What would come next, no one was prepared to see. And it is at this point that the story opens up before you. Have you ever wondered how two lives can meet and from that encounter only destruction can be born? Because Michelle didn't walk this darkness alone. She had a partner. And together they turned a car into something worse than any nightmare. An ordinary van on the outside. But inside, hooks, chains, silence. A mobile prison disguised as routine. This is where it all starts to go downhill. Michelle was a mother. She had a daughter. She could have been your neighbor. She could have been working the supermarket checkout. And it's precisely this contradiction, the banality of evil hidden in its ordinary appearance, that scares us more than any invented monster. Because monsters don't hide under the bed. They walk the streets, drive green vans, and sometimes go by the name Michelle. Think about it. What makes someone cross the line between desire and torture? Criminal psychology, the FBI, and serial killer experts try to explain. But perhaps the answer lies in something even more uncomfortable. Something within us. The curiosity we feel now hearing this story, isn't it the same one that drove Michelle? The fascination with the forbidden, the attraction to what terrifies us? You're here because you want to understand. Because true crime stories reveal secrets we'd never see up close in real life. It's psychological voyeurism. It's safe fear. It's the chance to get closer to the darkness, and then return home. But whoever enters Michelle Michaud's universe doesn't come back unscathed. Every detail, every decision, is like a broken mirror that shows the worst side of humanity. And at the same time it makes us wonder, could any of us have followed this path if circumstances were different? Today she remains there, locked up, awaiting an execution that may never happen, as California lives in a limbo between the death penalty and eternal reprieve. Michelle Michaud waits. But what she did lives on, pulsing in the memories of those who survived and in the corridors of hidden investigations. Because when we dive deeper, you'll discover that what seemed like just a fling was actually a portrait of something even darker. Do you notice how some stories don't end, even when justice has already been written in stone? The case of Michelle Michaud is like that. An open wound. An enigma that insists on breathing in the darkness. What if I told you there are still hidden recordings? Files buried in the prison system, contradictions that never made the headlines. That's what we're going to uncover together. But for this spiral to continue, for me to uncover each hidden layer, I need you inside. When you sign up, it's not just a number. It's a silent pact. It's you saying, I want to hear more. And believe me, your presence keeps this flame alive. Every click of the button allows forgotten stories, muffled by time, to speak again. It's not about me. It's about us. About this space where we look into the abyss and return transformed. You feel it, don't you? That mix of fear and fascination that tightens your chest. That curiosity that hurts but still begs for more. So subscribe now. Because in the next chapter, I'll show you something that hasn't been explained yet. A recording made within the walls, an archive that reveals more about Michelle's mind than any police report. But be careful. Once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it. The half-open door lets out only a thread of cold light, a sliver that doesn't illuminate but rather reveals. On the other side, there's not just the cell. There's the life that was ripped away, and the silent echo of someone who never returned home. Before talking about him, about the man who carried a red streak of contained fury in his eyes, we must look at her. For someone whose future was crushed by decisions that weren't his. She wasn't born to become a statistic. Her routine was repeated among books marked with notes in the margins, plans scribbled in notebooks, and small dreams that seemed too simple to attract attention. But simplicity is precisely what hurts the most when it's ripped away. Those who knew her speak of her easy laugh, her habit of observing the sky at dusk as if waiting for answers that never came. She had a desire for transformation, as if life could be a continuous movement of choices and sacrifices. However, the decisions that would define his end were not his. They were imposed by the mindset of someone already heading toward the abyss. A seemingly banal encounter, a seemingly harmless coincidence, became the thin line between everyday life and tragedy. It is at this moment that the narrative breaks, because the hidden truth doesn't reveal itself all at once. It insinuates itself, leaves traces, sows doubt. Behind the scenes of that night, details fragment like a cracked mirror. The last phone call interrupted by haste. The unlocked door. The unnatural silence of the street. Each revelation seems small, until it fits into a larger, darker pattern. This isn't just about a crime. It's about the collision of two worlds. That of someone who dreamed and that of someone who only knew how to destroy. Those observing from the outside try to rationalize. Could it have been avoided? This question repeats itself, but you find no respite. The psychological impact lies not only in the brutality of the act, but in the discomfort of realizing that nothing foreshadowed it. No clear sign, no glaring warning. Just a series of coincidences that, together, formed an inevitable fate. And when she left home for the last time, no one could have imagined it. The simple gesture of closing the door, leaving behind the books on the table, waving to a distracted neighbor. Small scenes that, seen in retrospect, feel like premonitions. What seemed mundane becomes an omen. A life interrupted without warning, as if reality had been ripped in half. The pain here isn't just empathy for what she lost, but the feeling that anyone could occupy that space. It's the fascination with the forbidden, the risk that a chance encounter could change everything. With each fragment revealed, the uneasiness grows. What if it were me? What if the half-open door were mine? This is the invisible wound the story opens in those who listen. Because deep down we're not just looking at a victim. We're looking at a mirror. She could be your friend, your sister, your neighbor. She could be you. The sure fear that accompanies this narrative isn't just about what was done to her, but about the impossibility of predicting, of controlling. The void that remains is the reminder that justice always comes too late for those who can no longer speak. But the fate of the departed is not isolated. It intertwines with the one who silently carried an ancient fury. A mind marked by twisted decisions, by the obsession with transforming pain into power. And it is in this invisible connection, in this thread of blood that unites the two, that the outline of something even more disturbing begins to emerge. A game of shadows, where each revelation raises more questions than answers. And each step we take toward the hidden truth only opens new, half-open doors. Until it's no longer clear whether we're facing a real story or an interpretation shaped by fear. And yet, one thing is certain. Her life was crossed by someone who, seconds before his execution, still clung to words that burned like red marks in his memory. What he said, what he didn't say, what was suspended in silence. All of this is about to be revealed, but not all at once. He didn't look any different. No red streaks etched on his skin, no visible marks to betray what was to come. On the surface he was just another face in the crowd. He greeted neighbors, managed to disguise himself with automatic politeness, repeated common phrases like someone shielding themselves behind a rehearsed script. An ordinary body. A seemingly empty gaze. But the cold light, when it fell on him, revealed fissures that didn't fit within the picture of normality. The biography told behind the scenes sounds almost banal. The son of a family marked by absences, a childhood of silence, an adolescence filled with half-open doors that never completely closed. Stories of change, of fleeing cities, as if there were something that always needed to be left behind. Teachers spoke of intelligence, but also of a restless mentality, incapable of staying. Small episodes that, isolated, seemed harmless, but together they formed a fault line that no one was able to spot in time. He worked. He studied. He dressed discreetly. A normality that bordered on effort, as if it were more act than substance. In social gatherings, his smile always came late, almost pasted on out of obligation. And when he laughed, his eyes didn't follow. There was a delay, a mismatch. As if behind the gesture lay a hidden truth, waiting to escape. Little by little the layers peel back. Reports speak of sudden outbursts, rash decisions that left invisible scars on those nearby. Pointless arguments, disproportionate reactions, the feeling of being faced with someone whose inner workings were different, a logic impossible to predict. Small cruelties hidden in games, phrases that cut through like blades, comments that left a trail of discomfort. And yet, no one dared to confront them. He was the kind of person who blended in unnoticed, but when alone, seemed to carry a weight beyond his reach. A kind of constant shadow, as if he lived forever under the cold light of something unspoken. One only had to observe him in silence to perceive the contradiction. Those who looked from the outside saw stability, those who looked closely saw the cracks. The transformation came slowly, like a door creaking when opened unhurriedly. Older friends say something changed in his posture, a strange rigidity, a habit of avoiding personal questions. As if he were afraid of being discovered. Or perhaps as if he wanted to be. This ambiguity is what's most disturbing. The doubt as to whether we're dealing with someone who wanted to hide their secrets, or shout them out. Behind the scenes, there were stories of unexplained broken objects, injured animals, small obsessions with control. Things that, in retrospect, became signs of a building collapse. But at the time, they were just forgotten details, red marks that weren't noticed. The hidden truth is that he was never completely invisible. He left clues as if testing how far he could go. The way he stared at people for seconds too long. The heavy silence that fell when he entered a room. The discomfort no one could put into words. It was like standing before a half-open door. You know something is there but you don't know what. And it's precisely this emptiness that consumes us. Because until the very last moment, even seconds before the execution, there still lingered the feeling that we didn't know who he truly was. Was he the ordinary man on the surface? Or the shadow that hid behind the ordinary gestures? Was it a biography of flaws or a perfect performance of stability? And behind this facade, there was an abyss that would soon open. There was something almost choreographed about fate. Two bodies, two stories that should never touch, sliding in opposite directions until the point of collision. The space was banal. Wide California streets, the usual afternoon traffic, the constant hum of engines and conversations that faded into thin air. But amidst all the noise, there was a hidden silence. A door ajar that chance held propped open. It was through there that the abyss would seep. She walked like anyone who believes they still have time. Bag in hand, plans in mind, a tomorrow waiting for her. The kind of normality that, seen now, hurts even more. Her every gesture, her haste, her distraction, even the way she brushed her hair against the wind, becomes a relic, a memory frozen in the instant before impact. What for her was merely routine, for him was already a sign. For him, her every step was a noise that needed to be silenced. On the other side, the car moved like an extension of a dark will. There was no rush, but there was no hesitation either. The cold light reflected off the glass gave the vehicle an ordinary, almost invisible appearance. But inside, the mind was already boiling. The steering wheel was steady, the breath held, the eyes fixed as if calculating every inch of the space around them. Their decisions were already being made. Decisions that could no longer be undone. It's disturbing to think that encounters like this seem casual, a crossing of paths between strangers. But what if it wasn't chance? What if there was something more from the start? A predatory instinct disguised as coincidence, a revelation yet unspoken, a red line running through the moment. Once his eyes met hers, there was no turning back. It was as if the world had closed in on a single target. She didn't notice. How could she? She was too busy with her own thoughts, with life still going on. There was no way she could have suspected that, just a few feet away, someone was watching her with a burning intensity, someone who saw in her not a face but an opportunity, a stage, a victim. And, at the same time, an intimate justification for something that had been silently nurtured for years. What happens in this kind of moment isn't just physical. It's psychological. It's like a blade that slashes reality in two halves. On one side, the life of those who believe in tomorrow. On the other, the shadow of those who no longer see themselves as part of the ordinary rules. The real impact hadn't yet occurred, but his mind had already crossed the line. It's at this moment that the transformation takes place, when the criminal is no longer someone trying to disguise himself, but someone acting as an extension of an inner abyss. Have you ever felt that uneasiness? The premonition of being watched even when no one is there. She didn't feel it. There was no time to feel it. The car approached, the half-open door of destiny slowly opened wide. And for him, there was no more dilemma, no more doubt. Just the execution of a mindset that could not be contained. The city continued with its normal sounds. People crossing streets, distant horns honking, voices in banal conversations. But in that specific fragment of space, everything became silent. This is the paradox. Terror doesn't arise in distant places or in symbolic settings. It arises in the banal. On the way home. In a space that should be safe. And it was within this seemingly banal space that the terror would become real. And when we think of that frozen moment, her walking distractedly, him watching in silence, it's impossible not to feel a weight. As if time had stopped to open that half-open door that no one else noticed. Maybe that's why certain stories resonate so deeply with us, because they're not just about them but about us. About what could have happened to any of us on any street, under any cold light of an ordinary day. And this is where I want to make a strange, almost intimate invitation. I want you to write a single word in the comments, holy. Because that's what hurts the most. The fact that the horror wasn't born in a dark alley but in an everyday space, a simple gesture crossing the street. But if this scene isn't trivial to you, if you believe there was something inevitable, a red line drawn long before this encounter, write that down too. Let your outburst out. This space is safe for your indignation, your memory, your empathy. Every comment you leave here isn't just a number. It's a way of keeping this kind of hidden truth being told, of showing that this pain, even across decades and borders, still resonates. And deep down, when you write, you're not just responding to me, you're having a conversation with history itself. Because sometimes a word is enough to open a door that remains ajar. The air seemed thicker in that narrow corridor, where every step reverberated like an echo of past decisions. The cold light reflected off the gray walls, and there was something in the silence that moved faster than any visible movement. Each shadow seemed to carry a history of choices, of a mindset shaped by experiences no one would dare imagine. She walked with the normalcy of someone who believes the world is predictable, that routine is safe, that life still holds small breaths of normalcy. But the danger, invisible, had found her path. The impact isn't instantaneous. First comes the discomfort, the whisper that something is wrong, the feeling of a red streak running down your spine. And then, without warning, reality transforms. The environment bends, the space becomes a prison, and every gesture, every breath, is calculated with a precision that both frightens and fascinates. It's not about blood or explicit violence, it's about the psychological effect, the horror that corrodes from the inside out, that invades the mind before any conscious awareness. It's at this point that voyeurism sets in, and you realize you're closer than you should be, that the terror is intimate, almost confidential. Stay with me until the end. Because if you think this is intense enough, you haven't yet seen the layers hidden behind the obvious. There are revelations no one could have anticipated, hidden truths that only unfold when you pay attention to every detail. The tremor of a hand, the fleeting glance, the heavy silence that precedes a fateful decision. And the reward for staying here is not just the story, but access to the backstage of the human mind, to the transformation that occurs when the ordinary meets the abyss. He observes, restrained, almost invisible. A presence that seems casual but carries its own logic, a sequence of decisions that culminate at the precise moment. There's something in his mind that fascinates and disturbs. Normality masking instability, banality hiding intentions, the facade of control crumbling into fragments of hidden truth. Every movement is revealing, every detail a piece of a puzzle you didn't realize you were putting together. And then the encounter happens. Not with a scream, not with a fuss, but with the subtle collision of lives that shouldn't cross. A car braking, a door ajar, a gaze that shouldn't meet. And in this seemingly banal space, horror infiltrates. The cold light reflects in the eyes of those who observe and in those who don't notice, and for an instant, time stands still. Your heart races. A sure fear sets in. You feel the impact, the tension, the transformation of the environment into something alive, something that breathes and observes alongside you. It's not just about what he does, but about how each decision resonates in her mind, how each movement alters her perception of safety, how each gesture shapes the pain that isn't yet visible. The corridor becomes narrower, the footsteps heavier, the silence more deafening. The human mind reveals its contradictions: fear and curiosity, empathy and repulsion, fascination and horror. You ask yourself, almost in a whisper, what if it were me? And it's this reflection that keeps your gaze locked, that transforms observation into almost complicity. The crime unfolds in fragments. Small gestures, seemingly insignificant decisions that, when combined, construct the victim's invisible prison. The method is calculated, silent, almost artistic. Reality buckles under the psychological impact, showing how violence can be invisible, yet no less devastating. There is a hidden truth in the minds of the observer and the observed, a fine line between horror and understanding, between regret and indifference. And even when the final moment arrives, when the victim is removed from the visible world, the horror is not over. It remains, lingering like a persistent shadow, a reminder that justice, mortality, and choice walk side by side in silence. There is a record, a recording, a contradiction that has not yet been revealed, a piece you have not yet seen. And that is why every detail matters, why every fragment of the story must be absorbed, felt, reflected upon. Stay with me until the end. Because the next layer will not only show what happened, but will open doors to what no one has dared to tell, revealing the behind the scenes, the decisions, the transformation that occurs when ordinary lives intersect with the abyss. Every word, every gesture, every shadow carries an impact you haven't yet fully grasped. And it is in this space between what is visible and what is hidden that true immersion begins, where safe fear transforms into understanding, and where the story continues, breathing silently, waiting for you to pay attention. Her mind, his mind, the streets, the hallways, the gazes, all converging into a point of tension that seems eternal, that lingers even after the horror. Every breath, every heartbeat, every decision, everything is part of a mosaic that has yet to fully unfold. And as you feel this pain, this inner unease, you realize that the narrative isn't just about them, but about you, about us, about what the human mind is capable of enduring and processing. And it's at this threshold, in this blend of reality and interpretation, that the line between what happened and what you imagine becomes subtle. That psychological voyeurism intensifies. That reflection on human limits, mortality, and justice becomes almost palpable. That the fragmented suspense continues, breathing with you, guiding your attention to what's yet to come, without ever giving in to the comfort of closure. The corridor still echoes. The cold light still lingers on the walls. The red line remains ajar. And something else approaches, invisible but undeniably present. A forgotten recording. A detail that changes everything. A revelation yet to emerge. Stay with me until the end, because the truth you seek still lurks in the shadows, ready to be felt. The corridor seemed to breathe even more heavily that morning. The cold light of the prison spilled over the damp concrete, reflecting in the corners where accumulated dust formed patterns that almost resembled symbols. There was a stillness that weighed more heavily than any sound, a silence that brooked no error. Every researcher who arrived felt the same chill creeping up the back of their neck, the sensation that something was out of place, that normality had been pierced by something invisible, something that would only reveal itself gradually. The scene remained as if time had decided to stand still. Scattered objects, overturned chairs, scattered papers. Nothing seemed out of place, yet everything was wrong. The environment spoke of subtleties, of small details that seared the minds of those who viewed it. The half-open door, the light reflecting off a metal surface, the residual scent of tension and fear. Each fragment carried the psychological impact of the crime before it was even understood, before words could define the horror that lurked within. The discovery of the body brought with it a silent wave of shock. It wasn't just the sight of the body itself, it was the realization that life had been interrupted in its natural rhythm, that routine had been shattered by a calculated, invisible force. And as investigators looked, they noticed small incongruities that defied logic. Objects out of place, subtle signs of a mental struggle, signs that the victim had sensed the presence of something deeper, something disturbing. Her every gesture, her every attempt to resist, had left traces that only a careful mind could perceive. It's at this point that the narrative fragments, as if you're observing through a lens that captures only reflections and shadows. The body, still and silent, contrasts with the environment that still pulses with the energy of those who were there, who breathed fear and made irreversible decisions. Every detail is an indication of transformation, from routine to chaos, from normality to the red line. And you feel, even from a distance, the empathy that mingles with inner unease, the curiosity rooted in the psychological voyeurism of witnessing something that shouldn't be seen but can't be ignored. The investigator's gaze sweeps across the room. Every gesture is meticulously recorded, every detail a clue to the hidden truth. The psychological impact of understanding that nothing here is coincidental begins to seep into everyone's minds. It's nearly impossible to separate empathy for the victims suffering from fascination with the method, curiosity about the motive, and the assured fear that transforms into reflection on human limits. Every breath, every pause, every moving shadow seems to carry a fragment of history, an echo of what the criminal thought, planned, and felt. And as the minutes pass, perception shifts. It's not just about the body or the environment, it's about the abyss that opens up in the observer's mind. The banality of evil blends with the complexity of the psyche, and you realize that crime is only the surface. Behind the facade of normality, the routine and trivial gestures, lies a web of decisions, psychological transformations, and hidden truths that gradually reveal themselves. It's at this point that curiosity becomes unbearable, and emotional pain mingles with the fascination of the forbidden. There's a forgotten recording, a piece of behind-the-scenes footage that hasn't yet been examined. A contradiction that challenges everything that seems evident, that casts doubt on the perception of security, that transforms the mind into a continuous field of tension. The uncovered body, the frozen environment, the heavy silence. All are just the beginning of a mosaic of revelations yet to unfold. Every shadow, every reflection, every small detail carries an impact that will be felt far beyond immediate comprehension. What seemed like an isolated crime was actually just the tip of something much larger. Something intertwined with decisions, mindsets, and choices that defy logic and cause a discomfort that doesn't easily dissipate. Death row, the cold of prison, the red line that spreads through every detail, everything points to a hidden truth, an impact that goes far beyond what's visible. And it's at this point that the narrative expands, inviting you to feel, reflect, doubt, and connect with each fragment of what's yet to come. The investigation advanced like an underground river, invisible yet unstoppable. Each piece of evidence gathered was a fragment of a puzzle that refused to be easily pieced together. The investigators moved with almost ritualistic care, noting details that at first glance seemed insignificant. A door ajar, a subtle mark on the wall, the reflection of sunlight through the cold light of the cell, illuminating something no one had noticed before. Everything was meticulous, almost obsessive, and you could feel the tension behind the scenes, as if the prison itself were breathing, slowly revealing the truth hidden within. As DNA analysis poured in, as fragmented testimonies emerged, a thin line began to form between seemingly disconnected events. Each witness, each record, each photograph carried a shadow of the past, a reflection of a mindset that didn't fit into the ordinary world. This wasn't just about an isolated crime, it was about decisions spanning years, about internal transformations that led someone to cross boundaries society should never allow. And you, even from the outside, felt the intensity of this impact, a mixture of horror and fascination, a disturbing empathy for what was lost, for what was destroyed. And then patterns emerge. Small, almost imperceptible at first. The same detail repeated in different places, an invisible signature left by the criminal that only careful observation could reveal. The truth reveals itself in layers, like a play of light and shadow. The mind of the perpetrator begins to emerge, laden with contradictions. The banality of evil, the distorted rationality, the indifference in the face of others' destruction. Each discovery is a psychological blow, a realization that the reality you once knew is fragile and unstable. You slowly realize that this isn't just one victim, nor an isolated execution. There's a pattern that defies comprehension, a red line that spans years, connecting lives, decisions, and mindsets. The behind-the-scenes details of this investigation begin to reveal that every choice the criminal made was planned, calibrated, a silent dance between control and chaos. There are decisions hidden in minute details. The positioning of an object, the way light falls on a surface, the cadence of a step, the way someone breathes under pressure. Every movement is recorded, every fragment is absorbed, every revelation adds layers to the understanding of the horror. And empathy transforms into intense reflection. You begin to wonder to what extent the human mind can distort itself before it's too late, how much of what we call normality is merely a mask concealing abysses. You feel like a confidant of the narrative, a safe voyeur, a witness to a psyche that shouldn't be understood, but demands understanding. And even in this fascination there's a subtle pain, a restlessness that infiltrates your own decisions, your own choices, the possibilities for transformation that real life never reveals so clearly. Amidst testimonies, forgotten files, and behind-the-scenes reports, a disturbing realization emerges. This wasn't the first incident. There were precedents, traces spanning years, records that point to the same mentality, the same patterns of behavior. And you realize that what seemed isolated is actually a strand within an intricate web, a sequence of events that defies justice, that questions morality, that leaves the feeling that something much larger is lurking, ready to emerge. Each new connection uncovered adds tension. Each link between past and present crimes heightens the psychological stakes. The cold light of the scene now seems more intense, reflecting off the walls with cruel clarity, revealing details that had previously gone unnoticed. There are files that remain sealed, revelations silently waiting for the right moment, a hidden truth that threatens to destabilize everything known about the case. You feel the anticipation, the need to understand, but also the fear of getting too close to this mind and this reality. And even when the pattern reveals itself, even when the story begins to take shape, there are fragments that remain just out of reach. Red herrings, contradictions, inexplicable decisions that instigate curiosity and unease. You find yourself wondering, will we ever be able to fully understand? Or is it precisely this uncertainty that keeps the impact alive, that transforms the narrative into something that pulses within you, as safe fear mingles with fascination for the forbidden? What seemed like just another isolated investigation now reveals itself to be a complex map of decisions, transformations, and revelations. And with each detail revealed, the tension builds, paving the way for what remains to be discovered. The criminal's mind, the forgotten files, the backstage of justice, all point to a truth that, when it finally emerges, would shake not only the courts but also the perception of those watching, and perhaps even their own understanding of what it means to be safe, to be alive, to be conscious. The pattern presents itself, fragmented but solid. The story expands beyond the crime itself, involving mindsets, decisions, invisible transformations, and impacts that resonate far beyond the opening scene. Every investigator, every detail, every shadow is a reminder that the horror doesn't end with the discovery of the body. The red line persists. And the truth about who they really were is still waiting to be fully understood, while the backstage holds revelations that will only emerge with patience, attention, and courage. The courtroom was full, but the air felt heavier than the crowd would have allowed. Every chair, every file on the table, every press camera concealed a silent, almost palpable tension that seeped into the bones of everyone watching. The words spoken there were not just accounts. They were fragments of a mind that crossed human boundaries, echoes of decisions that transformed lives and left traces that could not be erased. Depravity, cruelty, senseless. Terms that sounded like daggers in a room that should represent justice. And yet, justice felt like an incomplete ritual, an attempt to organize a chaos that could never be contained by walls, judges, or prosecutors. As the prosecutors unfolded their narrative with clinical precision, there was something else hidden, something not revealed in formal words. A cold light reflected off the windows, casting shadows over tense faces, reminding us that outside this space, the consequences extended beyond the case. Each fragmented testimony, each piece of evidence presented, was more than proof. It was a glimpse behind the scenes of a mind that knew no bounds, a mind that transformed simple decisions into acts of destruction, that transformed destinies into silent ruins. And you, watching, felt the impact of this as if you were inside the cell, witnessing the abyss through the eyes of someone who should never have known such freedom to act. There were strategic pauses, silences that carried tension, moments when the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. And even there, under the watchful eye of the judge, the press, and society, something remained untouched. The hidden truth behind the pattern that had begun to emerge months earlier. That seemingly disconnected sequence of actions revealed itself as a chain of decisions, each colder, more calculated, more impactful than the last. The criminal's mind gradually became an open canvas, revealing fissures, strategies, and impulses that no one could justify, but everyone felt resonate deeply and disturbingly. The audience in the courtroom struggled to balance revulsion and fascination. Some looked away, others couldn't help but take in every detail. There was a confident voyeurism there, an instinctive curiosity that clashed with the silent empathy for the survivors and the families who would never recover from the impact. Every word of the prosecution reverberated as a reminder that life is fragile, that seemingly trivial decisions can have unimaginable consequences. And amidst these echoes, questions arose that no one dared ask aloud. What if it were me? What if someone close to me were in a vulnerable position before such a mind? Defense attorneys attempted to fragment the narrative, introduce uncertainty, and open fissures in public perception. And even then, there was intense psychological tension. It was a play of light and shadow, truth and distortion, reality and interpretation. Each argument was a piece of a puzzle that could only be partially understood, and the feeling of psychological voyeurism intensified. You found yourself pondering the morality of decisions, the transformation of a once normal mindset into something bordering on destruction, and the weight of each choice made in secret. As the sentences were handed down, something curious happened. Even with the verdict declared, the room remained undisturbed. The air remained charged as if the courtroom were just another stage for what still lay hidden. The perception of justice seemed insufficient in the face of the real impact. Lives changed, destinies interrupted, secrets buried beyond recovery. Each sentence was a milestone, but it didn't close the cycle, didn't explain the depth of the decisions, didn't reveal the psychological consequences that would last for years. And deep down you feel like you still haven't grasped everything. There are invisible trails, clues hidden behind the scenes, records that remain sealed, details that only a trained investigative mind could connect. Every word spoken in court, every gesture of prosecution or defense, was a reflection of a greater truth, a silent impact that spreads beyond the formal walls of justice. You feel the red line hovering, an almost tangible tension, reminding you that the story doesn't end with the sentence, that the horror at its core remains intact, waiting for its moment to emerge again. And it is at this point that you, as a silent confidant, perceive the implicit invitation. There are more layers to uncover, more psychological transformations to understand, more revelations that patiently await those who remain attentive. As the courtroom empties and the cold lights slowly dim, the feeling remains: the story isn't over. The pattern hasn't yet been fully revealed. The red line still looms. And even with all the records, all the testimonies, there's still something that doesn't show itself, something that insists on remaining out of immediate reach, but which you now feel pulsing beneath the surface, ready to emerge when you least expect it. Each step of the investigation, each fragment of testimony, each detail of the criminal's mind, all builds up, paving the way for the next level of understanding, one that promises to further challenge the perception of what is real, what is human, and what is bearable. As the courtroom doors closed, the echo of the words still vibrated in the minds of everyone who witnessed the session. But there was something else, something that remained in the shadows, a detail that wouldn't find space in the newspapers, that wouldn't be mentioned by prosecutors or lawyers. A file lost among stacks of papers, a recording forgotten in some court system, something that held a truth that could change everything we thought we knew about that mind, about that sequence of decisions. And that's when you realize the story isn't over yet. If you truly want to understand, to feel every nuance of this case, every hidden fissure in the mind of someone who knew no bounds, then you need to be here with me. Each video, each investigation we bring, is an invitation to walk through half-open doors, illuminate corridors of cold light, and confront the shadow of what is both human and monstrous. And you, who feel this restlessness, who cannot disconnect, know that the truth is fragmented, and curiosity is the thread that keeps us connected. So, if you want to continue exploring every trace, every contradiction that justice tries to silence, every recording or archive that threatens to turn the narrative upside down, be a part of this. Sign up. Not out of obligation, but so that together we can reveal what hides behind the scenes, in the dark corners where the light of reason cannot reach, where the human mind leaves traces that few have the courage to follow. Your presence here is what keeps this search alive, what transforms mystery into revelation, what allows us to continue unraveling these layers of horror and hidden truth. And when you press that button, you're not just subscribing, you're committing to following along until the last fragment, until the next discovery, until the next recording that could change everything. Because the truth doesn't wait, and the layers haven't all been peeled back yet. What we'll find inside, maybe something no court has ever been able to judge. The corridor stretched like an endless tunnel, and each step echoed in his mind like a sentence that refused to end. The white walls, stained with time and oblivion, reflected a cold light that seemed more to observe than to illuminate. He walked among them not just as a condemned man, but as a witness to his own transformation, absorbing the weight of decisions he never imagined he would make, feeling the hidden truth spread in every shadow. The cell clock didn't tell time, it marked impacts, small cracks in his mind that widened with each day of waiting. Every glance that passed through the half-open door was as if observing a distorted reflection of what could still be or cease to be. And there, in the limbo of justice, one realizes that the sentence is not the final point. Punishment doesn't exist only in the form of bars and walls. It silently infiltrates the psychological transformation of those who await, the slow deterioration of a mindset that once seemed firm. The walls hold revelations. Every muffled scream, every whisper in the hallways, carries a story of impact that the outside world would never understand. It is a backstage of the human mind, a theater of past decisions, choices made under pressure and pain, all intertwined with the feeling of powerlessness. He sits on the cold floor of his cell, feeling the red streak of tangible despair, the cold light reflecting in eyes that have seen horror materialize, yet still search for meaning. Every shadow is a hidden archive, every mark on the ground a silent recording of a story society doesn't want to hear. The fault isn't just his, it's everyone's who stays away from deeper understanding, who stare at the headlines without feeling the pulse behind them. And you, watching this with me, feel the same unease, the psychological voyeurism that mixes empathy and fear, that creates an almost forbidden identification, a silent outburst that screams within us. And even when everything seems static, even when time seems to drag on endlessly, small clues emerge. A forgotten letter, a word whispered in secret, a revelation no one noticed. Every detail is a fragment that constructs the puzzle of the mind that now lives between expectation and nothingness, between justice and hidden truth. Past decisions reverberate in the corridors like multiplying echoes, and transformation is evident in small gestures. A hand movement, a lost glance, a breath heavier than silence. The silence in the hallway is profound but not absolute. Within it, echoes of lives that collided, of choices that were irrevocable, of decisions that still reverberate behind the scenes of what we call justice. Each night is another layer of introspection, each dawn, a test of perception of reality and interpretation. He looks at the half-open door, and you feel with him the weight of waiting, the impact of each thought, each regret that will never find a witness other than you. And then, like a breath of fresh air piercing bars and memories, comes the feeling that nothing ever ends. The prison, the condemnation, the waiting, everything is limbo, a space where hidden truths slowly reveal themselves, where horror mingles with reflection, where transformation occurs not in spectacular gestures but in details almost no one notices. And yet, something else awaits outside the cell, a twist that promises to defy all understanding we've had thus far. Because in the silence of the cells, while time drags on and the world outside remains indifferent, a darker debate still unfolds. An internal conflict that could never be officially recorded, but which pulses in every fiber of the observer, in every spectator who dares to feel along with it. And as you perceive this, whispers from the next layer begin to insinuate themselves, inviting the mind to remain attentive, to explore every trace, every trail left by those decisions. The impact of all this is still being measured, but one thing is certain. The limbo of justice is not just a waiting game. It is a living, breathing narrative, where the hidden truth reveals itself in fragments and promises not to surrender easily. The silence of the cell became almost palpable, heavy as lead. Every object, every shadow seemed to carry an echo of what was lost, of what could never be repaired. The walls didn't tell stories of justice. They told stories of absence, of decisions that became invisible scars, of a hidden truth that no court could touch. And meanwhile, the family waited outside, each day marked by a weight that didn't ease the pain, each night marked by the emptiness that no words could fill. Do you feel it? The weight of the impossible, the despair that hides behind a gaze that finds no answers. There are no pictures of heroes here, no comfortable endings. There is only the stark realization that human choices, when pushed to their limits, generate consequences that breathe far beyond time and space. There is an impact that manifests silently, in the corridor of the mind, in the transformation no one sees, in the mindset shaped by pain and fear. Memories, or what remains of them, walk alongside the condemned man. Each step is a revived decision, each breath a confrontation with mortality, with that which cannot be reversed. He knows that each moment will bear the marks of his own choice, that the horror he caused does not end with his own story, but lingers like a shadow, always lurking in the background of others' lives as if evil had its own breath. And it's in this space between what was done and what can still be perceived that you become more than a spectator. You become a confidant, a silent accomplice in a narrative that refuses to close. You feel the pulsing controversy, the invisible moral debate, the fine line between justice and revenge, prevention and punishment. Each fragment I reveal here is a provocation, a concern that demands reflection. The pain of the victim and her family is visible, but there's also the pain of the spectator who, like me, finds themselves confronted with the impossible. What if it were me? The prison corridor continues, endless, but now you feel every footstep, every echo. The condemned man still exists there, between regret and indifference, between conscience and emptiness. And outside, the world moves on, indifferent, while the scenes of the crime breathe. Every decision, every detail, every shadow of the past becomes a living archive, ready to be unraveled by those who dare to look beyond the surface. As you realize this, there's an almost electric tension, the feeling that something hasn't been told yet, that there's a hidden layer, a truth that defies any conclusion. The family's pain, the emptiness of justice, the horror of a decision that can't be undone, it all converges on a single point: reflection. And perhaps the most disturbing question is, do stories like this really end? And it's at that moment that you realize that the limbo of justice isn't just his. It belongs to everyone who observes, who feels, who allows themselves to penetrate the mind and the backstage of a world that blends reality and interpretation, cold light and red line, decision and consequence. Every fragment of hidden truth, every revelation yet to be delivered, calls you to remain attentive, to feel the impact, to reflect on human limits and the transformation that pain provokes in us all. Because deep down you know that evil somehow still breathes. And as you absorb this, the feeling is clear. This isn't closure. It's a silent invitation to question, to feel, to observe what many can't face. The story continues in every detail you perceive, in every shadow that crosses your mind, in every decision that echoes silently, asking for reflection. And in this whisper between what has been done and what is yet to be revealed, the narrative remains alive, incomplete, inviting you to delve deeper. If you've made it this far, I need you to know one thing: it's not just curiosity, it's not just history. You allowed yourself to feel, to question, to place yourself within this world that many would rather ignore. So do this with me. Leave the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," in the comments. It's a small gesture, but it tells me that you understand the depth of what we're exploring, that you feel its impact, that you're part of this search for answers, even if they don't yet exist. And if something inside you stirred, made you hold your breath or look at your own limits, leave your like too. Not for me, not out of vanity, but because each touch confirms that this truth we share here doesn't disappear into the void, that it reaches someone who cares, someone who feels it together. It's your sign of belonging, that this journey through the dark side of the mind and justice makes sense. Stay tuned, because there's something else waiting on the other side. A video here complements this story, revealing details that would never be obvious if we weren't still together. Click and stay with me there. We'll open doors that still tremble in the shadows, uncover hidden truths that shake the way you view justice, guilt, and morality. You are not alone. And every choice you make here, every comment, every like, every second watched, keeps alive this investigation, this sense of silent vigilance, this thread that connects us all to the stories no one would dare tell. Be a part of it, feel the weight, and follow me.